So today I'm going to talk about living systems, and I can't think of anything that is more important than that. Living systems. Living. We don't think much about life, actually. We just do it. We don't really seem to pay attention. It's sort of amazing, actually, that it's almost an afterthought. We aren't sure how it impacts us. We pretend it doesn't impact us. We take it so for granted. We don't understand the amazing power that it is. And then systems. What's a system? It's a connection of stuff. When we think of systems mechanically, that's kind of what we get. That there's a bunch of things that are strung together and they function in a certain way that gives them a sense of cohesiveness. And that's true of living systems, but there are some really major differences. So I hate to be pedantic at the beginning, but these real simple truths are so profound and we don't really think about them. So I feel compelled and compelled to say them over and over again until at some point we actually get it. So the first is that a system is a whole composed of parts. Now that's important in lots of ways. We're used to seeing parts, and so we don't see the systems often. But the parts also fit. It's the effective connections between the parts that allow the system to function as a whole. And so the parts are key and the fit is key. And what that means is that you can't take a part from one system and put it in another. Now, I think we understand that with mechanical systems. It's something that we're fighting with biological systems because we're trying to put pig hearts into people and are having some difficulty with that. But for invisible things like values, that concept doesn't even exist. We don't even think about that. And so that's one of the things I want to bring forward. And it's very important as we go on looking at values and how humans express values to understand that the parts from one system cannot be put into another system. They don't fit, and they make the system that they're inserted in ineffective or confused or corrupted. Also, when you think about systems, you begin to see patterns that flow among the systems. And it's those patterns that we really call values. So understanding patterns is key to living systems thinking. There's also the understanding, and this is life. This is how life impacts systems, is through autopoiesis. The magic of life and the magic of autopoiesis. Autopoiesis is the expression of life, is the way what life makes itself visible, known. It's absolutely magic. And what is autopoiesis? It's self-making. It's the ability of every system, every whole in life to make itself up. It's pretty astonishing, isn't it? Every cell in your body is a whole, and it has the ability to make itself up. And of course it does. We take for granted that it refreshes itself, it repairs itself. We don't think anything of it, but what does it mean? It means the cell understands its own health and seeks to make itself healthy and seeks to make itself continually exist or stay alive. Of course it does. But that's a miracle. It is an amazing fact. And if every cell of your body does that, and you kind of do that too, don't you? You make sure that you stay alive in lots of different ways. Then I'll bet there are some ways that don't help yourself stay alive, that you actually choose to engage in. That's food for thought, don't you think? If your intent as a living system is to stay alive, why would you choose actions that don't facilitate your staying alive? And that's the crux I think we're in. We talk about free will a lot, and I think this is what we mean. We have the ability to say no to life. We're the only species that can actually choose that. Now, some species will choose that when their life becomes so horrible, when they're incarcerated in zoos or cages, for instance. Some animals simply will lose the will to live. That's different than choosing to be in a cage that will indeed diminish your will to live. But we humans are able to do that. So autopoiesis as an expression of life is an absolutely amazing, exciting, fantastic aspect of living systems that, yes, we also have. And if we could but tap into that and use that as a measure, a key, a way of discerning when we're actually choosing life, then we can make ourselves in ways that do that. And that for me is what resilience and this huge shift we're in is all about. We're getting to very consciously choose life and do those things that make life thrive. The other thing about living systems is networks. Nothing stands alone. We say we're all connected. We use those words. We fear it, which is why we hang on to being separate. We're not sure we want to be connected to those people. And are we really connected to sludge and spores and bacteria? And yes, they are our ancestors. They are way older than we are and have much more experience in life than we do. This is what is true from the indigenous perspective. When they talk about their ancestors, it's not just their human ancestors. We're all kin. We are all connected. We are all related. And the planet is our ancestor. That is where we come from. Isn't that awesome? And we can say that about every living thing. Whatever it is, what I've just said is true about it. That's pretty profound, actually. So I've been reading Andreas Weber's book, The Biology of Wonder. And he's a very interesting guy. I can't say that he's the be all and end all. And there are some things that I would quibble with, I think. But he has a deliriously exciting way of talking about autopoiesis from the point of view of autopoiesis. He is that self-making. He can speak from that place where he is talking for that capacity of life. And it's ecstatic and wonderful when he does so. So he talks about nature as something that often reveals itself to people through and as a source of liveliness and enthusiasm. We talk about the enthusiasm of life, how plants just want to propagate and want to grow and no boundaries and all that kind of stuff. Isn't that a fascinating aspect of life? It self-makes in ways that are, according to Mr. Weber, meaningful and that provide value, i.e., thrivability, to the organism that is seeking it. That's kind of wonderful, don't you think? And that we share that. We understand those words personally. We have an internal experience of that. And Weber really talks about the internality of the world. We don't think about that much either. That's the whole point about cells. We look at cells and see what they do, but we haven't quite accepted that they are choosing to do that. We don't want to give the cell the choice, the capacity for choice. We want to make it mechanical, and it's not. It is living. It is an expression of life itself. And as such, it is constantly seeking, finding value and meaning in those things that make it better, stronger, healthier. Dare I say happier. As consciousness expands and becomes more complex, we can add happier. So for animals and plants, there's definitely a happiness to life and a sadness to life when those conditions aren't met. And we as humans know that. We know that here. We know that in our own experience because we are all connected, because we are all the same. I love his definition of life. It is to be alive, is to be a self that cares for itself. To be alive is to be a self that cares for itself. Amazing. To be alive is a self that cares for itself. So I want you to really take that in, to think about difficult situations that you have seen other people in, maybe not yourself. You can think about yourself too. And what does that behavior that you saw those people do in those difficult situations, what meaning would you make of that? Would you say that that is a self caring for itself? May not be real effective, but in that immediacy, the choices that that self made were made in order to care for itself. I think that is such a wonderful reframing of how the parts of a living system function together. So I want to say that again. I think it's a wonderful expression of how the parts of a living system function together with that intent of caring for itself. It takes actions that it perceives, understands, thinks, decides, believes will take care of itself. If we know that's the intent, and we can also see some challenges or problems with the choice, especially of more complex systems like animals and people, perhaps we can offer alternatives or provide opportunities for other choices. Working with the system, working with the desire to care for itself. It's amazing, isn't it? There is nothing like understanding living systems, in my view. It is so deep and so profound and so useful. So useful. So I talked about a system full of parts. And in biology, those systems full of parts are called ecosystems. We're familiar with ecosystems when we talk about plants, for sure. You know, forests are ecosystems. But we don't think very deeply about what that means. It's just a collection of parts, but it's not. It is an organism of its own. And that's why forests, old forests, are so familiar. And so, I didn't mean to say familiar, are so resilient is what I meant to say. Old forests are very resilient. And old is a really critical piece of that discussion because it takes time to gain the fit that allows for that kind of resilience. All of those little parts, all of the life forms that make up a forest, and yes, that's the myofascial connections in fungus in the soil, and it's the birds in the trees. All those things have combined to make that place thrive. And they contribute in a way that ensures that place thrives. And if something happens to part of it, the rest of it can come in and support the revitalization of that part that's hurt. But that takes time and experience with each other in order to make that happen. So old growth forests are so critical. So let's think about that in terms of people, communities of people. Here in the States, we move around a lot. Few of us have a true community with people we know. 5 years, 10 years, maybe 15, maybe even 30 years. But they're not people we've grown up with. And the people around us, most of them haven't been around for 30 years. So while we have been in a place for 30 years, the people around us shift. That's not true in forests. They stay and they work it out with each other until they can thrive. We have lost that skill. But it's inherent in our genes. It is something that we need to have happen. And some of us are starting to think that with the changes we're going through, it will become actually a survival skill. And I think that's true because that's how things work. You create ecosystems of those things that are needed in this place to keep this place thriving. And it is life that forces that expression if we stay and listen to its need for expression. Another interesting thing that Weber talks about that they've learned in biology is that cells don't obey genes. They interpret them, and in his words, freely. That's autopoiesis, is that interpretation. So you know what the structures are, you know what the possibilities are, the challenges are, what is actually happening in a space. And then you figure out how to make it thrive by interpreting or using or accentuating and dampening certain parts to make it all fit and to make it work well together. That's life. That's what we do in everything we're doing. That's the joy of life, is that experimentation, that trying, that playing, that experimenting with this or that or this way or that way. That's what we do. And if we could work with it and enjoy that process, wow, what an amazing thing might happen. So the emerging part, this is going to sound complex, but it's really not. The emerging whole is more than the sum of its parts, as it is constantly assuring its own existence. And as consciousness gets more complex, we become aware of that process and enjoy it. That's one of the gifts of being human, I believe, is our ability to enjoy our self-making, to notice it, to actually see it happening, and to enjoy it. When we resist it or deny it, it gets really dicey because we're not responding. We're refusing to engage. And it's the engagement that is needed. You have to engage with life in order to figure it out. If you don't engage, if you don't play with the opportunities, then that ecosystem never happens. The connections that need to be formed never happen because you're denying that engagement. You're denying that connection. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but it does mean that it's not healthy or skillful in its expression. It takes time and practice to be both healthy and skillful, as old forests know very well. Living systems, so important to understand those dynamics. It gives us a way to reflect on our own experience and who we are, and to begin to see the connections that make this whole. We live on a planet that is a living system composed of parts, all of the other living systems that share an intent and purpose. The prime directive to always create the conditions that support life. Pretty simple, pretty profound. So join us as we explore this more deeply. Life as a living system expressed through the self-making of all of the other living systems of which it is a part. Pretty juicy. in my estimation. So look forward to talking with you more about this.